I always find a really interesting topic. I'm a chef, so I do like cooking with lots of fat. The old adage that the more butter you put in the chef, the better. And obviously a lot of restaurant foods and restaurant cooking, where I originally started cooking, you do use large amounts of fat, particularly sort of dairy fats and cream and butter. So I find an interesting relationship between fat and health. Because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about it, and obviously you don't want to eat sort of huge amounts of fat in your diet, but also, when I was growing up, I suppose, there was this big association with reducing fat intake and health. That was seen as like the thing you did in order to eat healthier, was reduce the amount of fat you have in a diet. Most diets were kind of, most health diets anyway, were sort of low fat diets, and health products were generally sort of low fat products. But I think in the last probably quite 20 years there's been a bit of a turnaround, or significant turnaround maybe, in terms of what the perception of fat and health and food, and how we should be thinking about fat in terms of health has really changed quite a lot. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, back then there was a lot of focus on fat, and there were lots of fat-free products, and there still are occasion, you do find fat-free branded around a little bit, but now in terms of the evidence for health, we know that there are different types of fats, and actually, yes, saturated fat is the one that we need to be kind of just watching a little bit. Actually, we don't really eat too much of it in this country anymore in general, but that's the one that can have an impact on your health potentially, and especially on your heart health. So that's the one to watch a little bit. But now we know that actually the unsaturated fats are really beneficial for our bodies, and so we actually need more of those in our diets.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting point there, because fat intake, and when I talk about low fat diets, there are two strands to that, because fat is a very highly calorie dense substance. It's the most, it's far more calorie dense than carbohydrates or sugar, which actually people are surprised about sugar actually usually, but fat's almost twice as calorie dense as sugar is in terms of calories per gram. And does tend to make things very palatable, tends to make things very delicious. It gives them that sort of richness and that deliciousness. And so there's always been that association. If I reduce fat, I will reduce calories, and reducing calories is generally thought of as being healthy. So that's kind of one strand of low-fat diets. But there's also, like you said, the strand, the particular types of fats, saturated fats, which tend to be associated with butter and dairy fats. Coconut oil is one with a lot of saturated fat in it. Those were sort of seen as being uniquely unhealthy. Which is obviously, like any of these things, if you try and oversimplify it, it's generally it's wrong, and you're missing a lot of nuance. But also cholesterol is another interesting one. Cholesterol was, for years and years, we were told to reduce the amount of cholesterol in our diets, and perhaps that's slightly misleading as well to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it used to be thought that dietary cholesterol, so cholesterol that we eat, is going to affect our blood cholesterol. So an increase in dietary cholesterol will increase your blood cholesterol, which we know is then implicated in heart disease. But actually that's now known not to be the case. So it is fine to eat foods that contain dietary cholesterol, such as prawns and eggs and things like that.
Prawns was always an interesting one, because generally we thought we'd been quite healthy, and then suddenly there was this scare almost that it was like, there's cholesterol in prawns. And people got concerned about that. Eggs, another thing eggs are a really delicious food. They're hugely versatile cooking ingredient, obviously, and they're very nutrient dense, and it's quite good to encourage people to eat eggs, especially as they're cheap as well. Cheap and quick, convenient. If you know how to cook slightly, you can make something out of eggs very quickly.
Yeah, even I can't go wrong with scrambled eggs.
But you can go wrong with them. So it was always sat quite uncomfortably with a lot of people, with me included, that people were saying, we must really limit our consumption of eggs because dietary cholesterol. Turns out that was probably fairly misleading advice. Obviously, don't eat 50 eggs a day.
Yeah.
But
as with everything, there's a balance.
There is a balance to be had. But this real idea that eggs was a real problem for heart health, I think, was found to be lots of studies been done, and it's found to be misleading, at least for the vast majority of people. Your dietary cholesterol doesn't really affect that. Yeah. So in terms of fats, obviously there's another side to fat, which is there are some fats which are beneficial to health and almost others are essential to health.
Essential in our diet. So the ones that are beneficial are the unsaturated fats, and in particular the ones that we probably don't get enough of are the omega-3 unsaturated fatty acids, and those are found in oily fishes, so things like salmon and trout, mackerel and tuna, but not the tinned variety of tuna, just fresh tuna. So we should all be including more of those in our diet, and then if people don't eat fish, there are plant sources as well. Yeah. But they are more difficult. So if you don't eat fish, you can have the plant sources of omega-3s, but it is more difficult for our body to convert it into the EPA and DHA that we need.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a lot of the stuff we do in the course, actually, or not a lot of the stuff, but some of the recipes we do are on this particularly, because oily fish consumption is something that generally is supported by pretty much everybody who talks about diet and health will say we should eat more oily fish. Oily fish is a pretty good thing to us to be having in our diet. We generally don't, especially in this country actually, we don't really like oily fish that much. Our fish tends to focus on cod and haddock and the white fishes, which aren't oily fish. Oily fish stronger in flavour, but some of them are, tuna, you mentioned, fresh tuna steak, obviously very expensive fish, and some of them are expensive, but things like mackerel.
Mackerel's quite reasonable.
But I think people struggle with the cooking of them sometimes. There are things that need handling reasonably carefully. So we'll go through some fairly simple recipes, so that aren't too scary and intimidating. A lot of people struggle with cooking fish. And look for sort of simple, reliable recipes, which is an issue and probably one of the reasons why most people aren't consuming that much. So we'll look at some of those and some sort of convenient products which have good levels of oily fish in. So part of the recipe thing is on that area.
So fat overall, we definitely need fats in our body, and part of this session is kind of taking the fear away around fats, I think, and saying, yes, okay, so these are the saturated fats and we perhaps, just need to watch those a little bit. But these are the unsaturated fats and we need more of these in our diet. And also the overall kind of palatability of the diet, actually, if you take fats out and reduce the palatability of that food, then people tend to then carry on eating more because they're not satisfied. And so we know sort of from research that actually the more satisfied somebody can be with their meal, because it's sort of got everything that their body wants in it, and that is good for the taste buds and everything else, then actually the more likely people are to feel fuller quicker.
Small amounts of fat can make certain foods really, really palatable and far more delicious, which will encourage people to eat them, and those foods might well be beneficial. I mean, from the recipe point of view, for what we're doing in this course particularly, my expertise, I've worked quite a lot in food manufacturing, and the problem with things like fat and salt and sugar are that they're delicious. They really are. There's no denying it. Adding lots of butter to something makes the sauces absolutely delicious. In most restaurants, they'll put in amounts of butter, which would probably be slightly terrifying to a lot of people. And you think, wow, why can I not make my sauce taste like this at home? Well, because you haven't put half a pack of butter in. But they're obviously very delicious, but within the food manufacturing environment, which I worked in for 10 years or so, that you have to control what you're putting in, because you have nutritional labelling, you have nutritional targets, and all these sort of things. So a lot of my work would be reducing salt and sugar, and particularly fat, because fat tends to reduce the total calories of something in a variety of dishes. And so I over the years have developed a number of skills and ways of doing that, and also guidance to how much fat you can have. Often there's a slight diminishing returns. You can't, if you keep on adding, there's a certain amount you can add to make something particularly delicious and palatable, and then so it's knowing how much that is and being confident to be able to reduce fat in recipes. But also something that people perhaps don't realise, and this is something that I've sort of learnt from years working in food product development, is often when you reduce the amount of fat in a dish, other flavours come through much stronger. Fat's quite a good masker of flavour, so you need to put quite a lot of other stuff in order for the flavours to come through. If you reduce the amount of fat, particularly in things like curry sauces or even in sort of pasta sauces and things like that, other flavours come through much stronger. So actually, sometimes when I work on products, if you reduce the amount of fat, you find the spices are coming through too strongly, and you have to sort of make them die down a bit. So fat is quite a masker of flavour, and it's really interesting. We do some tasting comparisons where you can taste things with different amounts of fat in. And often people prefer further versions, not with no fat in, because that can be quite bland and it can be quite dry, but a certain amount. There's a sort of often an ideal amount in terms of getting the most flavour out of a sauce. So I think that's it's an interesting point. Perhaps a lot of people wouldn't realise it can, too much fat in it can actually mask flavours. And so there are a variety of different hints and tips in terms of not removing fat, but reducing the amount of fat, getting some of those nice sort of unsaturated fats in, and sort of things with oily fish and the omega oils that you mentioned.